when I was watching these movies and suddenly became aware that the very subtle music in the background was changing how I felt about the picture that I was seeing on screen. And the same, you're talking about a static image, but something else, there's an audio element of that, and it's pulling you somewhere else. Maybe it's reminding you of something from the past, or you're thinking about something that's in the back of your mind, but it's definitely pulling you into a different emotional space than you would have been otherwise. So I love that, and it does make a huge difference to see, the music and the visual element put together.
So great to meet you here on Zoom.
And you, thank you for inviting me for this chat. I enjoy watching your other interviews with other artists, so thank you. It's nice to be a part of it.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that, and I'm so glad I saw your music, your videos on Instagram, because and heard your music, of course. So I would so love to hear your story. You are based in Ireland.
I'm in Ireland, yes. I'm out in the countryside. I grew up in Dublin in Ireland, but I'm now in the countryside, out in a place called Cavan. It's all green landscapes all around me. So I have my studio up here, and this is where I'm based. So I'm up here, and here's where I produce my music from. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, but I hear your very strong Irish accent.
Yes, good. And you recognise people in Ireland can recognise the Dublin accent. I'm about 20 years in the countryside here, but I haven't lost a Dublin accent. That one persists.
Yeah. Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so you have a different accent from where you live now?
Yeah, I do. Very different, yeah. I don't know what it's like in Austria, but we'd have very different regional accents around Ireland. So would it be the same in different where you're growing up there, or where you're living there?
Yeah, I grew up in South Africa, and we also have it there.
Oh, wow. Right.
North and south, different accents, and even in the south, different areas,
Okay. I'm thinking the weather must be very different in South Africa than it is in Vienna. How are you surviving the Vienna winters?
Actually, the summers are quite hot. Yeah. So it's just the winters that's a bit different. But otherwise,
we're almost holidays, and that kind of helps with the cold winters. As we know it here in Ireland, it's very, very wet and very cold at the moment. Yeah,
exactly. But I see also some of your videos has got a lot of rain in, and I was thinking, I wonder if you're inspired by weather, because it must be raining a lot there.
It is raining a lot here, and you may have noticed a lot of my music would have a sort of a melancholy vibe to it.
Yes.
Well, that the sort of the rain, walking in the street in the rain, has a lovely sort of an image that that captures it. And I think living here, we're all very familiar with that. And it's not always nice to walk down the street when the rain is coming down on top of you, but you have to stop and embrace these things. So I always think there's something lovely about that visual. Somebody walking in the street with the umbrella, which I use quite a bit. So I think it just marries up lovely with the kind of melancholy sound that I would go for predominantly in my music. Yeah.
It's like you say, it's these things. I mean, it's part of where you live, so you might as well embrace it and
it's the inspiration, isn't it? So it comes from all around you, I guess. I suppose where I am, I always try to gather some content as well where I am. Like if I'm away on holidays somewhere sunny, obviously a beach, you're always likely to catch some beautiful content on a beach or something like that. But there's something about that darkness and that winter or autumnal visual which I really like, and it appeals to me. There's a huge forest park very close to me here, and if you're in the middle of this forest park, you could be in the middle of nowhere. You would think there's no civilization around you for miles, and it's beautiful, and it's only about 5 minutes from where I live here. So it's lovely to take these trips down into this forest park all year round.
Amazing. And also the rain has got this repetitive repetitive sounds, like you say, and it's also that's also something that It's musical, really.
Well, it is. I've actually released a couple of tracks, and where I was recording with the piano sitting right next to the window, the rain was belting against the window from the outside, and the microphones picked up the sound of the rain. So I just kept it in because I think it adds to the ambience of a track like that. Obviously, you don't always want secondary sounds in where you're recording, because sometimes you may want a completely clean sound. But I was recording, and I thought, maybe just practicing or doing a demo, but next of all, I picked up the sound of the rain on the window with one of my tracks, Letter to Guinevere in particular. You can really hear it, and the rain belting against the window, it just adds something else to the track. So I just left it in.
I love it.
So it might kind of help the person to feel like they're sitting in the room while the music is being played. I think somebody could sit back and close their eyes and just picture themselves wherever they are with the rain belting against the window. Which I think a lot of people tend to like that here in Ireland. Although the weather is bad outside, there's something beautiful about sitting inside in the warmth, isn't there? And looking out the window at this going on outside.
Yeah, I quite. I'm not fond of the wind, but Vienna is quite a windy city, and I must say, I don't mind the wind when I'm inside, because that sound. It's almost as if you hear the wind, but you feel safe inside. It's that. It's in a way really comforting.
Comfort, and the word was right on the tip of my tongue. There is something comforting about that, all right. Yeah. So that's why I don't mind leaving things like that, and particularly the sound of the rain, because there's something just something homely about it, I think.
Are you affected by the weather, or are you somebody that's really your emotions or your feelings affected by the weather?
I suppose you can be, yeah. I guess it's easy to be in a good mood when it's in the summer. At this time of year here now in Ireland, we're getting about 4 or 5 hours of daylight. Other than that, it's darkness. So I think you can't help but be affected by the weather. But I guess if you're composing melancholy music, it's much easier to do that with the rain and the darkness outside than if there's children playing across the way and you can hear them from outside the window. So I don't know. You can be affected by it, but I wouldn't necessarily. For example, I wouldn't want to live in a country where it was sunshine 16 hours a day all year round. I don't think I could do that. The contrast is nice, yeah.
But when did you start playing piano? Because you mostly play piano.
I mostly play piano. So I started playing piano, I think I was 6 years old when I started playing, and I had, official piano training for a number of years. I didn't play it then. Once I got into my teenage years, I kind of stopped playing the piano, went into other things. I sort of got into dance music and into the production end, and I stopped playing the piano. But once I got to maybe 18, 19 or 20, I kind of started playing the piano again, got a piano into my house and began playing again. And only a number of years ago, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, kind of got into that neoclassical sound, which is, it's piano and strings based music predominantly. I really got a love for that. There's something with the piano and something like a cello. They really blend well together for music. And it's a sound that I really love, and I love to kind of develop that sound.
Yeah, you're saying that now. I went to a concert once with where piano and cello played. There was a flute as well, but the sound of the piano and the cello almost, I don't know if I describe it right, but it felt like something melting, like a lava or something warm and flowy, that sort of feeling. Yeah.
But you can't beat that feeling of live music, especially if it's something like that and you're really absorbing it. I've been at some shows lately where you have this intro of a piano, and as soon as you hear that deep sound of a cello, the bow being pulled across a deep string, there's something beautiful. I think it hits you. And especially if you're watching that music live, the sound of a cello is something that really can kind of, you can feel from inside you. There's something guttural about it because it's so low down in the octaves. So it's a sound that I love, and it's a sound that I think I will always use. I sometimes go off and develop off into, I have no problem using something like synth sounds and something like that. But always come back a piano, a cello, and a viola, those instruments
Really?
melding together is just there's something magical about the sound that you can get, and you can get a really big sound from those three different instruments. I mean, you could have just three players up on the stage, and a whole auditorium can be filled with sound just by those three instruments on stage, and people tend to go quiet and they want to pick up every little nuance that's being played. So I really do love that. It's something that's dear to me. Yeah.
But this is always interesting for me, how musicians are attracted to a specific sound of an instrument.
Yeah.
So I spoke to a cellist a while ago that he started playing the cello just because as a child he heard the sound of the cello during a science experiment.
Okay.
And it's often you hear that somebody said, oh, they heard the sound of this specific instrument and that attracted them.
Well, they could almost like a magnetism to it. I think the same can happen to a certain genre of music or something like that, or something which you hadn't thought much of. Like, for example, I only really became fully aware of this impact that music was having in movies. There was one in particular, the movie Arrival. It's kind of a sci-fi movie back in, I think, 2016, and it was composer Johan Johansson did the score for it. And using some different elements in there. And there was a switch went off in my head when I saw this movie, and I thought, I only realized for the first time the power that the music was having. But beforehand, it can kind of go over your head. If it's not something that you're all that interested in, you're watching the movie and you may not even be aware that this sound is going on behind the scenes that you're watching, because it can be very subtle. So something happened and I became very aware of this kind of immersion that you're being pulled into the movie via the sounds that are going on. And so I really wanted to develop that genre then. And a switch went for me. And I just, like you say, how somebody can hear an instrument and have that magnetism to it. That's what it was like for myself when I watched this movie in particular, and a few others as well. But it really started to pull me in. And I could see the power that the music with picture was having. And so that's kind of why I like to tell a story, I guess, even myself, even if it's a little 30-second piece of video that you're just trying to capture that somebody walking in the rain, or a certain element or mood that you're trying to portray just by putting these two elements together. We're not all making 2-hour movies, so we do what we can in the world of kind of short media content, where you can do a 30-second little piece of content, 1 minute or something like that, just to meld those elements together.
Yesterday I spoke to a composer who actually has on his Instagram page like a little segments where he puts music to paintings. And we were talking exactly about this thing, how music suddenly changes how you see the picture. And I saw actually on your Instagram this one video with a bicycle standing and then the rain in the background. And I thought to myself, this is so simple, but yet it's so beautiful. This static thing, and then the rain falling.
Isn't it amazing that something like that, what you're hearing can actually change what you're feeling about the picture? Yeah. And I guess that's sort of related to what I was saying there when I was watching these movies and suddenly became aware that the very subtle music in the background was changing how I felt about the picture that I was seeing on screen. And the same, you're talking about a static image, but something else, there's an audio element of that, and it's pulling you somewhere else. Maybe it's reminding you of something from the past, or you're thinking about something that's in the back of your mind, but it's definitely pulling you into a different emotional space than you would have been otherwise. So I love that, and it does make a huge difference to see the music and the visual element put together. Instagram was actually great for that, because it opens up a window for so many people to get their work seen that they wouldn't normally have that sort of audience space for themselves.
It is. And I mean, for you, the fact that you would like to tell stories, it must be also a lovely creative process to put the videos to your music, because you have this picture in your mind and you can actually do it.
Yeah, and I love doing that as well. It's like, so for me, half my time is spent playing the music here in the studio, or piano in the corner, so I can sit there and do it. And sometimes that can also be overkill. You're working on a project for such a long period of time and you're playing a certain piece of music that you're writing over and over. So to take a break from that, you can go off into that video creation process. And funny enough, my son, who's only 12 years of age, he's actually way better at the video process than I am. And he started to teach me how to use this video editing software. And that became like another love for me, apart from the music. So I actually love delving into that, where you can, get an eye for a photograph or something like that, or develop a video, pick up multiple pieces of content out and about and put those things together into your little story, which I always feel that music is, especially this kind of neoclassical music, it's always about telling a story and bringing the listener along on a certain journey. Whether that's the same journey that the composer had or not actually makes no difference, because the person is actually creating their own story in their mind. A bit like, I suppose, when you're reading the book, you're creating this, what the visual element to the book that you're reading. I guess it's the same if you're listening to a piece of music, you're sort of creating that story. And so for me, those melancholy elements is always sort of an emotional part that I like to develop in the stories that I'm kind of trying to bring somebody along with.
And isn't it also amazing that, because you said now at the time when you were a teenager, you sort of stopped playing, but if you think now, young people have all these tools, so they can actually make it makes everything they do can make a little bit more interesting. So, it's...
One of the problems is there's so much, there can be so much available now. I guess, like, the technology didn't exist when I was young in my piano playing days, and as a younger teenager, when I started when I was 6 and say stopped at 12 or 13, there was no technology then. We didn't even have phones at that point. So I guess you could learn to play the piano without all of these other elements pulling you away, fighting for your attention. So I guess there's the yin and yang element of these things now with technology. The barrier to entry is now very small for people to get involved, or say teenagers or anybody who wants to get involved in making music. There used to be a financial barrier, which isn't there anymore. Nowadays, the technology that exists, even on somebody's phone or an iPad or something like that, they can get little studios and recording work done. But I guess there's the flip side of that is all of these different elements can be pulling your attention elsewhere. So it may be difficult to focus on that one element, but people do it. People do focus on it. But it's great, that abundance of technology out there. It can only be a good thing so long as you can stay focused on what you're trying to achieve, because it's very easy to have one idea here, but then something else is pulling you away over there. And I think it's actually a common problem with lots of composers, producers. They would have lots of unfinished projects because that shiny thing over there, they can tend to go for it. So there's a bit of a skill, I guess, in going, I'm working on a project, finish this project, move on to the next thing, and try to keep those horse blinkers on so you're not being pulled from one area to another.
But do you, when you start composing, you obviously you have your inspiration, you start composing. Is it a process that moves on gradually and you commit it, or do you stop and start? That you have other things that
if I'm working on a particular track, for example, I try to stick with it. Now, I may have 2 or 3 that I'm delving in and out of. I predominantly would be writing on the piano first. And so for me, I kind of get a chord progression, and something starts to develop where if I'm playing something and I start to feel that there's something in there, there's a little emotion going on in there, I tend to develop that. And a piece can start off quite simple and minimal. And as I'm playing it over and over again and I'm developing this idea, I'm adding in maybe little subtle changes into the piece, and it just slowly gets more complex as it goes on, where it may just start off with a very basic chord progression or something like that, where I feel, there's definitely an idea in there that I want to develop, that every time I come back to the piano and I keep playing it, and I might play it slightly differently. So I try not to get sidetracked as I did in the past, doing this one project over here and 2 or 3 other projects over there. I tend to try and finish nowadays that have some deadlines or record labels and stuff like that. So there's nothing like a bit of pressure to force you to finish a project on time.
Oh yeah.
Because I think if you're doing your own thing and you have no deadline, it's very easy to say this project is not finished. And constantly fighting for that perfection, because one finished released track is going to beat 10 unfinished tracks every day of the week, because they never get to see the light of day and nobody else ever gets to experience them.
And do you ever get stuck, that you get to a point where you think, okay, I don't know, or I'm not inspired to do something else with it?
I think I always have multiple ideas that I'm sort of figuring out. And what I tend to sit at the piano and I play so many different things just while I'm practicing, and I'm practicing finger work or whatever, going up and down the keyboard of the piano. And if I happen upon a little idea, but it's not time to develop that idea because of something else going on, I'll pull out the phone and record it, because it will be forgotten. The amount of times I have said, no, I remember that because it's a good idea, you just really won't. I never really got what some people will call writer's block, where they say, I'm sitting in the studio and I can't come up with something. I may have a piece of music that I'm working on that I get to a point and then I kind of say, this is just not working for me. And where it was in my mind, I'm having some difficulty translating that into the real world. So I may just park it, and one of these other ideas I will then tend to develop, and then to come back to the original idea and then develop it. And just sometimes taking that day or two away from it can just releases your mind from thinking about it, because you may be thinking about it too hard. You may have listened to this piece of music too much, because you could be sitting in the studio, you might play the same piece of music 50 times in a day. So you might be overhearing this piece of music. And so that can make you get stuck. Writer's block though, no, there's always so many ideas bouncing around. And if I get to a point where I'm sitting saying, I don't know what I'm going to record today, I'll pull out the phone and I'll go through the gallery and I'll see multiple of these little motifs that I've just come up with. And that generally stimulates a new part of creativity.
So it's like a little notebook that you have.
Exactly like a notebook. So again, back to this technology, where would we be without it? I do remember years ago, we might record something. I had one of these little tape recorder, a cassette recorder, and I've recorded some pieces. But you might play the motif and then come back to it 6 months down the road and you say, geez, I actually can't remember what. And then you're trying to noodle the motif back out again. So it's great. I just set up the phone, record my finger work on the piano, and basically like that, like a notebook of ideas. So there's always multiple of those ideas sitting in my notebook, as you would call it. So I always have that sort of little library of stuff to come back to.
And when did you actually start composing?
So in my early 20s, I would have been, I won't call it composing, but I will call it maybe producing, because it was producing predominantly dance music. I was a nightclub DJ, and so I was producing dance music. Worlds apart from the neoclassical stuff that I'm making today. I guess the actual, so that gave me good background in the production and the recording side. I guess the neoclassical, I really started to get a love for that maybe 6-7 years ago, something like that, listening to some of the like contemporary big neoclassical composers and some of the movie score producers. And I started to focus more on that style of music, started to compose, started to more write my piano piece, and then develop out the notation for string patterns, such as the cellos and the violas that are going to accompany the piano. So I started to get into that more composition element of it that I really love today. And it's great, again, back a number of years ago, to compose, you had to have your score printed out, and you had your paper score and you're writing it in with your pencil, where now you can use software like Dorico and you can start writing your cello pieces using your computer and print it off out. It makes the whole process easier. But it's a process that I love, because developing out those ideas, it's a new skill set. So if you're just a piano player, you have to think differently, because a cello player plays very differently to a piano player. So you're coming up with these parts for somebody else to play, and sort of how these two elements are going to mix together. It's a process that I really enjoy, though.
But did you have any background to cello music?
No, none at all.
Oh, okay.
The only background I had was the piano lessons that I had taken, and that was the only formal music sort of education that I had. And everything else came through trial and error and through listening to other people's music and I guess if I'm listening to a piece of music that I love, I'm always breaking it down in my mind. I'm always trying to think, what's that in there? Is that just a piano and a cello? Is that a cello I can hear on the left-hand side, or viola I can hear? Is it a full string section? So in my mind, I'm constantly sort of breaking down what's that composer actually doing there. And then sometimes there's a technology aspect to it as well. And you think, are they using delays? Are they using different reverb? So I'm constantly, if I'm listening to what somebody else is doing and I'm loving it, I'm trying to deconstruct what they have done in my own mind. And it's a nice process, and you can you have to put yourself, I guess, when you're composing for other people, you have to try and you're imagining that you're sitting in the room with the strings players around you and where they are and how they're complementing each other for the notation that you're going to use to put these string parts together.
But is it, so you didn't have formal composition training? So this is, wow.
Yeah, so, but I guess the composition that I'm doing now would be for quite small sections. So say for a piano and a string quartet, beautiful. Something came along and I have to wait for a 60-piece orchestra on the stage. I think I'd bring in some help at that point. But it's great to sit and say,
but this is amazing. Yeah.
Good. It's a lovely learning process, because if you love that sound, it's all about kind of putting yourself in that space, or where is this going to sound overall. When I'm imagining I have the piano pan to one side, and then I'm bringing in a cello player and a viola player and a violinist, where are they all sitting in the section, and how are these sections going to blend together without creating an audible mess? So you have to think about how these sounds complement each other.
So you have the ability really to see music within music. So you can hear the different parts of the music then.
I guess so, yeah. And I mean, like, it's that always trying to deconstruct what I'm hearing. That goes back even to the dance music days, I suppose. If I heard something that somebody has done, I'm thinking, how did they come up with that sound? And I guess the more experience you have, the easier that becomes. And straight off the bat, then, if I hear you hear something, and I don't know, an untrained ear might just say that sounds like a cello, but you might hear that. I might hear, no, there's more there. There's more going on. There's a cello and there's a viola working together in this pattern where you have, one player is getting louder and the other player is more subtly getting lower as these elements are blending together. It makes a very fluid sound, and that's why strings tend to work very well together. So I guess from my point of view, strings are easy enough to write for because they do complement each other. I guess that's why that's why you have a string quartet, for example, because these players really complement each other well, and the different octaves of sounds will always stack up and sound beautiful if you can get the correct notes together.
But when you started composing and now, so you work on commissions as well, or do you just do your own?
I'm doing some commissions for some short film. I've done the soundtracks for some short film lately. I've done some last year. I'll be doing some again now next year. So that sort of stuff. And then predominantly for myself, I guess I would call myself more a sort of a concert composer, because I would see my music, it's more written for on stage. Other people might describe it as cinematic, which it is, but I wouldn't only see it as cinematic, because I love to see this style of music played live. And there's a lot of it that gets played live, and there's a whole community of people. If you go, especially in Ireland, which is quite small, if you turn up for these gigs, sometimes you'll see some of the same faces turning up to these gigs, because people who are interested in this music, they tend to really be interested in it. It's quite niche, but those who are fans of it tend to be really sort of super fans,
But you say also your music is quite minimalistic. So, but I see also your visuals are like that, which is great.
Yeah, I always feel if you can tell your story in a few notes as possible, I think that's what should be done. It's very easy to keep on adding more and more elements to a musical project, and that can make it sound messy. There can be a point where, once you feel that your message or your story or your sort of emotion that you're trying to portray in this piece of music, once you've achieved that, you have to be able to stop and say, you don't need to keep on slinging in more elements just to fill it up. I guess in some cases, it can take some bravery because it might be very minimal. So I would have some pieces myself where it's just solo piano, maybe recorded in a larger space, so you get the reverb is to fill up the space rather than filling up the audio space with other elements. I like to stick with the minimal nature of a sound. It's just my personal preference.
It's like good food. You don't need a lot.
You don't need to overcomplicate it. There's a saying we have in Ireland is don't overcook the pudding, I think. Yeah. So when the pudding is cooked, I'll try and step away and say it's cooked now. I don't want to overcook it. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you still do? You said you did. You were a DJ, but do you still listen to sort of party music and that sort of genre?
Every now and again, I try to listen to the music that I used to play as a DJ, and it just doesn't sit well for me. So for me, I very, like you say, when you were looking at, say, a picture and your emotion was being manipulated almost by the audio that you're hearing, I'm very much like that. My emotions can be controlled by whatever piece of music. I can really be affected by it. So if I'm listening to a piece of neoclassical music, for example, I can be very subdued and relaxed and that little bit of melancholy and you're taking you off somewhere. The dance music that I used to love and that I used to make, every now and again, I just try and have a listen to see, is this something that I still have an interest in? And the more the time goes on, I think, no, I don't have that interest.
Really?
It takes me to a place that I just don't enjoy anymore.
Yeah.
If I'm out on a night out and there's some music playing, I don't have anything against any other genre of music, but it's not something that I would listen to now in my personal life. Sometimes for nostalgic reasons, you may still pull out a piece of music that you listened to when you were 18. But that kind of dance music element that I listened to when I was 18, that music is just a little bit too crazy for me now. I'm a little bit more relaxed at this point of life, so I think I've just moved on from it,
I must say, I was a teenager in the late 70s and early 80s. So that music, sometimes I just put it on just to take me back to that time,
And does it sit well with you these days, or when you go back to it?
Well, I wouldn't listen to it all the time, but sometimes it's nice to just listen to it. And I can actually, it's interesting how music can really transport you back, because sometimes I hear something on the radio, for example, and then I can actually see myself exactly where I was, and it takes you back.
Music is one of the only ththings that can do that, really, isn't it? You're almost re-experiencing that experience
Absolutely,
like you had decades ago. And funny you mentioned the 80s. I always maintain the 80s was a great decade for music. Like the music that I'm talking about was in my late teens, was in the 90s. Music got a little bit more crazy as we went into the 90s, especially the dance stuff. But I have an 80s playlist that I will still stick on sometimes, and it's a little bit calmer than the sort of the techno stuff that came along in the 90s. So it was a good era. Yeah. But that being transported back by the music, it's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But that's something about that. Yeah, the crazy 90s, say, techno dance stuff just doesn't sit with me. It doesn't sit with me anymore. It just makes me slightly uneasy. So I tend to just go, I give it a few minutes and I'm straight back onto my playlists with the neoclassical composers of the day.
But Gav, are you a good businessman?
Am I a good businessman? I am very focused in what I do, and I will tend to see projects through. I ran my own business before I was into making music, and along the side, while I was making music in the beginning, I ran my own business. It was actually a machinery company, and it done pretty well. So those business lessons that I learned from that aspect of my life, I brought forward into my, say, music making life, which is, it's very important to finish a project. And like I was saying about the deadlines, it's important to meet those deadlines. It's okay being an artist and a creative, but there's an element of professionalism that's required when you're working with other people. And you have to, I think, address these things in a business-like fashion, especially when there's other people involved. Like, say, for example, when I'm working on a soundtrack for a short film or something like that, you have to take the ideas of other people on board, and the movie maker and the director and other things that they're doing. They're elements that don't apply when you're sitting in the studio making a piece of music for yourself. But especially if you are sort of self-releasing music rather than for a label, the music can go on forever, because there's never, like I was saying earlier, there's never that end point. So I think you have to sort of have these limits upon yourself and say, well, I can't work on the same piece of music for 6 months, because that would mean you'll make 2 releases in a year. And I know something is only finished when it's finished, but at the same time, it takes that sort of professional approach, I think, to say, this is a project, it needs to be finished. I know it's art, but the time has to go in to finish the project, so you can draw a line under it in that business-like fashion, and then you can move on to the next project.
Yeah, and it's also, you have to earn from your work, so it needs to get out.
Well, it does. It does. You have to get it out there. As a creative, I guess, I know you initially create the art for yourself, and like, I will make the type of music that I like to listen to. But if it's not getting out there and it's not getting to people's ears, there's something very satisfying about knowing that people are listening to your music all over the world.
Yeah.
A number of years ago, when I got my first couple of tracks out, and I started to see the reports coming back that, people I'm making this music here in Ireland, and I see there's people in South Africa or Mexico or Brazil or anywhere it's being listened to in these places, some cities that you hadn't even heard of. So to get the music to people's ears has to be the end game, really, even though you start off the process making the piece of music for yourself.
Yeah, I can understand that, and especially if you get the feedback, people's maybe also attach their story to your music.
Exactly. It's one of the wonderful things about social media, that reach that you get, because you get a lot of comments, and people may comment under some of my posts and stuff, and they say, I'm crying my eyes out listening to this, but it's in a good way. Or they will say, I'm in the middle of a breakup, and although I'm sobbing my eyes out, your music is helping me. So it's a lovely thing to know that somebody that I've never met in my life, firstly, has listened to my music. They've connected with it in such a way that it's bringing tears to their eyes, and then they'll actually go and they let me know about it. So I love to see it, and it's great when somebody actually lets me know that they've really made this personal connection. It's like this invisible force going across the world. A piece of music that I may have written sitting at my piano in a place of solitude, that is then, there's thousands of people, tens of thousands of people all over the world hearing it, and some of them at least will shed a tear, and then to let me know that they have shed a tear, to know that they're making a connection. It's very powerful, and it's rewarding. It gives you that drive to keep on doing what you're doing, I guess.
I think it's so too, and I think sometimes you don't even know about the people that who your music has touched. Yeah. So just to have that feeling, to think it's out there for people to listen to, I think that's the wonderful thing about it, about art. That you've created something that touched somebody on an emotional level.
Exactly, and in saying that, you will never know all of the different people who are hearing it.
Exactly.
But to have it out, to be in a position that you can create this art, and there's very few who actually get the opportunity to create it, to get to release it, and to have it out there, reaching people's ears all around the world. Whether you're releasing that yourself, which I've done as well. I've released some myself. I've released some with the backing of record labels. And so to have somebody like that believe in you enough, like we'll say an A&R and a record label, that they sign your music and they believe in it. Well, especially in the beginning, you may be unsure about what you're doing, but that really can help with your own confidence and self-belief in your own work. That somebody having that, belief in what you're doing. And so to have it getting pushed out there all around the world, to have it affect people, they're listening in their workplace, they're listening when they're sitting at home. It's something very powerful, and it is really rewarding. So it's something that I love.
But was it difficult for you, the first piece that you composed, to put it out there? Were you unsure of yourself, or were you very confident?
No, I won't say I was very confident, because after all, even having been producing music for a lot of years, you're still very unsure of yourself, especially when you move into a new genre like myself, like doing the neoclassical or that sort of cinematic sound. So you never really know. And I sent a track to a record label, not really knowing what would happen. But you know what? I was I was heading for 40, and I kind of had shed off some of that, some of the self-doubt that you have in your younger years. And as I was pushing on for 40, I kind of said, you know what, I don't really care anymore. I'm gonna put it out there, and I'm gonna see what happens. So I sent the track to a record label. They came back and they asked me to do another demo or two for them. And they said, yes, come on board and we'll release your music. So it was brilliant to see that. So for me, that was like, over the moon, party time. myself and my family were cracking out the champagne.
Yeah.
And so since then, that record came out. And so carried on in that same vein, producing the music that I love. And I think obviously the more successful your music becomes and the more you can see that it's reaching people's ears, that builds another confidence, and you get this feeling that, you know what, I actually do know what I'm doing here. And so you hone your skills. You're always honing your skills. Every day is still a school day because you're always working with technology, which constantly changes. And but it's a nice learning curve. It's a nice learning curve. To be able to be involved with it on a professional level is just so rewarding. And there's a very limited number of people who get to do it at a professional level. So I'm thankful that I get to be one of them.
Yeah, and I think the more, like you say, the more confident you become through, the feedback and the positive feedback, that also sort of sparks your creativity more, and it's makes you work on greater things. And
of course, it's that that rewarding nature. If there's people listening and there's people connecting with it and they're even letting you know about it, there's people who contact me and they'll say, I'm your fan. And so if somebody's gone to the effort and they're connecting with it in such a way, you feel like, well, then if somebody else is going to the efforts to even come back to me and let me know the connection that they've made, I think I owe it to them to go, you know what, I'll continue doing what you enjoy me doing. And there's a synergy, I guess, because if nobody's listening, what's the point in carrying on making it? Exactly. Although you do make it for yourself, I guess. If no record label was taking my music, would I still be sitting in the studio tomorrow to make a track? I guess I would, but it wouldn't be as rewarding knowing that it's being listened to all over the world. And you do feel that, if you're making the effort to listen, then I also owe it to you to make the effort to keep on making the music that you love to hear and to keep putting the effort in to make good music, hopefully.
Yeah, no, that's true. But so your son, is he also a musician?
He dips in and out of being a musician. So he started doing some piano lessons, and so he's done his piano lessons for a while, and he fell out of it just like I did when I was a kid, but I kind of stuck with it longer. That's it, that technology pulling him elsewhere. But he's a technology driven kid. He has his own YouTube channel. He has his own TikTok channel. And so that's more the elements that he's in. Sometimes he'll come into the studio and he'll play around, and I'll say, go ahead, do whatever you need to do. And he will noodle away, as I would call it, on a few bits and pieces. But he's only 12. He might come back to it. But there's no pressure for him to be a musician. Either he's going to be into music or he won't. Either way, obviously, as somebody who makes music myself, and I know how rewarding it is for me, I would like for him to be able to experience that same thing. So technology and music, they do go hand in hand. So he may well come back to it, but he has his little bases. He's done his few formal piano lessons and that sort of stuff. And the house is filled with stuff. There's pianos and there's musical instruments, all around the house that he can pick up and play with. So it will never be for the lack of, having a musical instrument there. So he may well come back to it.
And he will also, as a grown-up, be taken back to the sounds that you've created in the house.
Well, exactly, yeah. And I guess he will walk in, and if I'm working on a piece, he'll ask me, "What's that one called?" Because it may have a name, even if it changes afterwards. So he will generally know the pieces that I'm working on. So he sort of does know about the process. And then, he might hear one being played on Spotify or something, and he'll say, "Oh, I didn't know you actually released that one already."
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he's familiar with the process.
He's aware. He's definitely aware.
He is aware. He is aware. Yes.
But I spoke to a singer-songwriter a while ago, and I was thinking now because we talked about the emotional connection with the music also, but what he said was that if he goes back to his recordings that he did earlier in his life, he can it's like a filing system almost of his life. You know, so he knows exactly, oh, this was this stage and this stage and this stage.
Yeah.
Do you find that as well with your music?
I do. Like sometimes there are elements that in some of the earlier pieces that I worked on, and I say, oh, if only I knew then how to do this little trick, this audio trick that I can do now, well, then that piece would have been better. But you know what? It's that trajectory, that curve, I guess, of an artist's work. You can't go back and change it. If you want to go back and start changing it to make it better, then it changes something. Because you might think to yourself, that piece of music would have been better had I done this. But there's already people loving that piece of music around the world. So it is what it is. I guess you could always come back and do a rework like some composers do at some point. I think you maybe need to leave a long enough period of time to do that, to revisit a piece, and to, I suppose you would, at that stage, you would deconstruct it and rebuild it rather than just kind of tweaking it and wanting to make it a little bit better. But yeah, I guess, like you say, it's that sort of, you can look back on your work like these stepping stones, and
exactly, yeah,
you can see your sound developing along the way, or you can see a particular moment in time where, for example, you might be working on a project. You know, say for an album, it's going to be a much bigger project with maybe 12 tracks. So you're trying to keep a similar mood or vein across 12 tracks. So I sort of prefer smaller releases like EPs, where you may only have to make 3 or 4 tracks to develop that sort of mood that you're trying to create, and then you can move on to the next mood. And then these things, obviously, the release cycle, you can see where things developed along the way. But yeah, sometimes you think you might like to change them, or you may not be happy with something that you've done. But you know what? It's out there, and it's part of your...
Yeah, but I think that's the magic of it, you know, that it should be left alone. I see it with my photographs as well. I'm sometimes tempted to go back and also redo them. But then the moment I start retouching them, or not retouching, but changing maybe something about the light, and then I think, oh, no, I have to leave it because that was what I did then, or the mood that I was trying to create in that sense, you know.
Where you were, because if you start that tweaking, like with your pictures, and you start trying to change it, you can go down the rabbit hole and start making too many changes, and then you can become muddled up with something. And you know, it's like that sort of, where don't overcook the pudding scenario, where you can get lost in the process, where it is what it is, and it was, you know, of its time, right where you were at that moment. Yeah.
But Gav, you've got such an interesting story, and
thank you.
I love your music. Absolutely love your music.
I love to hear that. So thank you.
Oh no, really. But what are your wishes still for the future?
So I'm working on a number of projects. I have a number of EPs now lined up. I'm working on a compilation album for a record label in Spain, where for World Piano Day, which is every March. So they celebrate, you know, the piano being played all over the world. They're putting together a compilation album with many different artists from around the world, and they've asked me for a contribution. So I'm currently working on a piece for it. I'm also currently have a couple of EPs that I have lined up, so they will be coming out in 2025. Live shows I would love to look at. I was chatting to somebody earlier in the week here, looking at different venues around Ireland here and in Dublin. I would love to have a look at that, putting a live show together. We have a few pretty decent neoclassical artists on the scene in Ireland that I would like to pull together. But just for now, the EPs, actually getting the music out is a much bigger thing for myself. Getting the EPs out, working on the albums, and having the music released. That's my prime focus, yeah.
So, and then you collaborate, do you have always the same musicians that you collaborate with, or do you...
No, I with different people. So different people are always going to bring different elements, whether it's a vocalist or a strings player or whoever it might be. I would never be closed off to working with anybody or to working with different people. I guess you would you have to at different times work with different people, because if you sit in the room and you play the piano yourself and you work with the same musicians, you're always going to end up with something that sounds the same.
Oh yeah.
And so I think you sort of have to develop along the way. And so somebody new always has a different input, don't they? They can bring something else to the party, and
exactly,
always additions that can be there. So always open to working with different people and different elements. Yeah.
Amazing. And do you tour also, or do you do concerts outside Ireland?
No, but I've had one or two offers in the last year, but they didn't materialize just through
Okay.
other projects that I've been working on. So the timeline didn't line up, but nothing on the cards just yet. But who knows? I'll get out of Ireland one of these days. Yeah.
Let's do it for Vienna.
I'd love it. Yeah. And I'll save you a seat right in the front row. Yeah.
Please, I want to be there.
100%.
Gav, this was so great to talk to you.
And you, Petra. Thank you. It was lovely.
Thank you so much for your time and for your wonderful story and your wonderful music.
Thanks a million.
And beautiful videos that you do. It's just the whole package. I love it.
I'll continue to do it, and I'll continue to watch your channel, and I'll continue to watch your
thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Great to chat to you today.